Imagine you were holding a photograph. It is black and white, slightly blurred at the edges, the way photographs from the early 20th century tend to be. In the center of the frame, two men are hanging from the branch of a tree. Their bodies are limp. Their hands are tied behind their backs. Their necks are broken. But here's the thing that makes this photograph different from every other photograph of violence you have ever seen in your life. The crowd around them is smiling. Not a crowd of 2 or 3 people. Not a small group of men in hoods. A crowd of hundreds. Men in suits and ties. Women in church dresses. Children perched on their father's shoulders to get a better view. Teenagers grinning at the camera with the casual ease of people at a county fair. Some of them are looking directly into the lens. They want you to see them. They want you to know they were there. They are proud. This photograph was taken in Marion, Indiana, in August of 1930. The two men hanging from that tree were Thomas Shipp and Abner Smith, both black, both teenagers. They had been taken from the county jail by a mob of several thousand people, beaten nearly to death before they were even strung up, and then displayed for the better part of a night while the crowd grew and grew. Postcards were made from photographs like this one. They were sold. They were mailed. People wrote notes on the back. Vacation greetings, holiday wishes, sent through the United States Postal Service with a federal stamp. Now I want you to hold that image in your mind, not because I want you to suffer, but because what you need to understand right now, before we go a single step further, is that what we are about to talk about was not secret. It was not hidden. It was celebrated. And that is the thing that almost no one tells you. That is the fact that has been quietly buried under 70 years of American amnesia. The lynching era in the United States of America was not the work of fringe extremists operating in the shadows. It was not the action of a few deranged individuals that the rest of decent society condemned. It was a mass public institution. It was attended by thousands. It was photographed, printed, mailed, and sold as entertainment. And the people who carried it out, in thousands of towns across 32 states, almost never faced a single consequence. Between 1877 and 1950, at least 4,084 black Americans were lynched in the American South alone. Let me say that again, because that number is easy to read too fast. 4,084 documented cases in the South in 73 years. That is one lynching every 6.5 days, every single day of every single year, for 7 decades. And the word documented is doing a great deal of work in that sentence, because historians who have spent careers studying this period believe the true total is significantly higher. Many killings were never recorded. Many were covered up by the very sheriffs and judges who were supposed to investigate them. Many happened in counties so remote and so hostile to outside inquiry that no one outside those counties ever learned of them at all. But here's the thing that I want you to sit with. Here is the thread that is going to run through everything we examine today. The question that historians have debated, that survivors carried in their bodies to their graves, and that the American government has still, as of this recording, never fully answered. Who was really running this? Because the evidence, the actual documentary evidence that was buried for decades, suggests that lynching in America was not primarily mob violence at all. Not in the way we have been taught to think about mobs. It was, in many places, in many counties, a coordinated system. It had participants in law enforcement. It had participants in local government. It had the silent approval, and often the active assistance, of state officials who had the power to stop it and chose not to. And there is a paper trail. There are telegrams. There are letters. There are newspaper editorials that functioned as open invitations to violence. There are sheriffs who conveniently stepped away from their jails on the nights mobs arrived. There are governors who received direct requests for intervention and did nothing. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the documented historical record. And by the end of what we are going to examine together, you are going to understand something that most Americans have never been taught, that the lynching era was not a failure of American justice. It was American justice, functioning exactly as it was designed to function for black Americans living under Jim Crow. We begin in 1877. you have to understand what was destroyed first. Because the lynching era did not emerge from nothing. It was a response. It was a weapon. And to understand what it was a weapon against, you need to understand what the years immediately after the Civil War actually looked like. Because here is something that the standard American education almost never teaches adequately. Reconstruction worked. Not perfectly. Not without violence. Not without enormous struggle. But in the years between 1865 and 1877, something genuinely extraordinary happened in the American South. Black men voted. Black men held political office. Black men served in state legislatures, in Congress, as sheriffs, as judges, as school board members. Hiram Revels and Blanche Bruce represented Mississippi in the United States Senate. Joseph Rainey of South Carolina became the first black congressman to serve in the House of Representatives. By 1870, over 700 black men held elected office across the South. Let me say that clearly, so it lands properly. Less than 5 years after the end of chattel slavery, black men were serving as United States senators. And it was not just politics. Black communities across the South were building. Schools were established at a rate that astonished outside observers. Churches became the center of community life and political organizing simultaneously. Land was being purchased. Businesses were opening. Towns were incorporating. A class of black professionals, doctors, lawyers, teachers, and ministers was emerging and growing. It was fragile, underfunded, opposed at every turn by white resistance, and operating under the constant threat of violence. But it was real, and it was gaining. This is what Reconstruction was, and this is what white Southern power could not tolerate. The terror campaigns against black political organizing did not begin after Reconstruction ended. They began while Reconstruction was still happening, while federal troops were still present, while the constitutional amendments were still new. The Ku Klux Klan, the White League, the Red Shirts, these were not spontaneous grassroots reactions to some perceived injustice. They were organized paramilitary operations designed specifically to do one thing: drive black Americans out of political and economic life by making the cost of participation in that life unbearable. They murdered black office holders. They burned black schools. They attacked black churches. They killed voters on their way to polling places and murdered the men who ran them. In Colfax, Louisiana, in 1873, a white paramilitary force massacred approximately 150 black men, many of them after they had already surrendered and left their bodies in the open for weeks. A federal prosecution followed. It reached the Supreme Court, and in 1876, the Supreme Court ruled in United States v. Cruikshank that the federal government could not protect black citizens from private violence. That individual states were responsible for their own citizens' safety, that the 14th Amendment only applied to state action, not private action. Think about what that ruling meant in practice. Think about what it meant in a state where the governor was aligned with the Klan, where the sheriffs were members of the White League, where the judges attended the same churches as the men who planned the killings. The Supreme Court had just told those men, the federal government will not stop you. You are on your own. Which, from the perspective of the men committing the violence, meant you are free. Then came 1877. The presidential election of 1876 between Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden ended in dispute. Electoral votes from 3 southern states were contested. The resolution was a political deal, the Compromise of 1877, that gave Hayes the presidency in exchange for the withdrawal of federal troops from the South. With the troops gone, Reconstruction was over. Not formally, not with a single announcement, but functionally, immediately, completely. The thin federal umbrella that had been protecting black political life in the South was folded up and taken away, and what followed was the most systematic rollback of civil rights in American history. Within 5 years, black voter registration in Mississippi dropped from almost 100% to nearly zero. Poll taxes were enacted. Literacy tests were invented and applied selectively. White primaries were established, making Republican Party membership irrelevant in one-party states. Constitutional amendments were circumvented. laws were rewritten, and the enforcement mechanism for all of it, the tool that made disenfranchisement and economic subjugation stick, the instrument that made sure no black person would ever again risk asserting the rights that the Constitution technically still guaranteed, was terror. Specifically, the rope. I want to be very precise about something, because precision matters here. When we use the word lynching, we are not talking about one type of event. We are talking about a category that encompasses a range of actions, all of which share the same essential feature: extrajudicial killing carried out by a group with community knowledge and often community participation, designed to enforce a racial and economic hierarchy. Some lynchings were carried out in private, in the middle of the night, by small groups. A man taken from his home, a body found in a creek the next morning, a coroner who ruled it death by unknown causes and moved on. But the vast majority of documented lynchings in the peak decades of this era, from the 1880s through the 1920s, were public events, announced in advance, attended by crowds, reported in local newspapers, sometimes the same newspapers that had published the original accusation, sometimes the very same editors who had written the editorials calling for violence. Here is how it worked in practice. In the counties where it was most systematized, a black man would be accused of something. The charge was usually one of a small number of things. Assault on a white woman was the most common, and it is important to understand immediately that historians have established conclusively that in the overwhelming majority of documented cases, the accusation was false. Ida B. Wells, the journalist who would dedicate her life to documenting and fighting the lynching epidemic, published an investigation in 1892 called Southern Horrors, in which she demonstrated, using the public record, using the newspapers, using the statements of white witnesses, that the accusations of rape and assault that triggered the majority of lynchings were fabrications, sometimes completely invented, sometimes descriptions of consensual relationships that white family members refused to accept, sometimes cases of mistaken identity, sometimes the result of personal or economic disputes in which a false accusation was a convenient weapon. But there were other charges too. Talking back to a white man, touching a white woman accidentally, owning land that a white neighbor wanted, starting a business that competed with a white-owned one, voting, attempting to vote, organizing other black workers to demand fair wages, testifying against a white man in court, witnessing something a powerful white man did not want witnessed. The accusation, once made, moved through a specific sequence. The local newspaper would publish it in inflammatory terms. Words like fiend, brute, and monster were standard. Details were rarely verified. Named suspects were described as guilty before any proceeding had taken place. The editorial might note that the citizens of the county were understandably enraged, that they could hardly be expected to remain calm, that the law was slow and uncertain, that justice demanded something more immediate. This was not accidental language. It was an invitation. The sheriff would be notified that a mob was forming. Often the sheriff had been notified before the newspaper went to print. In case after case, documented case after documented case, the sheriff responded to this notification by making himself unavailable, by leaving town, by entrusting the jail to a single deputy who would unlock the door when the mob arrived, by claiming afterward that the crowd had been too large, too determined, too overwhelming to resist. None of these sheriffs were ever prosecuted.
Old Spice Super Hydration, vitamin booster for 24/7 healthier.
Many were re-elected. The mob would arrive. The prisoner would be taken. What followed was not always quick. Historians have documented cases in which victims were tortured for hours in front of crowds of thousands, in which body parts were removed as souvenirs, in which victims were burned alive while the crowd watched and cheered. These details are not included here for shock value. They are included because the scale and the spectacle of the violence was intentional. It was designed to be seen. It was designed to travel. It was designed to reach every black family in every surrounding county and communicate a single message with perfect clarity. This is what happens. This is what we will do, and no one will stop us. The body would be left hanging, sometimes for days, Sometimes the family would be prevented from retrieving it. Sometimes the body would be mutilated further after death. The local newspaper would run a follow-up article describing the event in the language of satisfied justice. Phrases like, "the community has spoken," and "swift retribution" appeared regularly. National wire services picked up many of these stories and distributed them across the country. And then, nothing. No arrests, no trials, no consequences. Because in virtually every county in the Deep South in the peak decades of the lynching era, the men in the mob were the same men who served on grand juries, who sat as judges, who wore the sheriff's badge, who wrote the newspaper editorials, who ran the banks that held black sharecroppers' debt, who owned the land that black tenant farmers worked. The system was not failing to respond to the violence. The system was the violence. 4,084 documented lynchings. That is the number compiled by the Equal Justice Initiative in their landmark 2015 report, Lynching in America, which remains the most comprehensive analysis of the historical record ever published. It covers 12 southern states from 1877 to 1950 and is based on contemporaneous newspaper accounts, court records, NAACP files, and academic research accumulated over more than a century. But the EJI's count is of the South only. When you add documented lynchings in northern and western states, the number rises substantially. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Kansas, California, Nebraska. Lynchings occurred in at least 32 of the 48 states that existed during the peak era. Mississippi had the highest documented total, 654. Over 650 murders, most of which resulted in 0 arrests and 0 prosecutions, in a single state over 7 decades. Georgia was second with 531, Texas with 492, Louisiana with 391, Alabama with 360. Certain counties were, by the historical record, killing fields. LaFleur County, Mississippi, Yazoo County, Mississippi, Brooks County, Georgia. These were places where the terror was so thorough, so complete, that black residents understood their continued existence there to be conditional on total submission. Any assertion of rights, any departure from the enforced codes of deference, any economic success that exceeded what white neighbors considered acceptable, could be, and frequently, was a death sentence. And here is something that is almost never taught. The victims were not only men. At least 159 black women were lynched in this period. Women accused of defending their husbands. Women accused of being accomplices to black men who had asserted themselves in some way. Women accused of nothing at all. Killed simply because they were present when a mob came for the men and their families, and the mob did not want witnesses. Mary Turner, 8 months pregnant, was lynched in Brooks County, Georgia, in May of 1918, after she publicly protested the lynching of her husband. A crowd of several hundred people killed her in a manner so savage that the full details remain almost unprintable more than a century later. A local newspaper noted her death in 4 sentences. Children were lynched, teenagers were lynched, men in their 70s were lynched. And in at least 41% of documented cases, according to the EJI's analysis, the victims had not been accused of any criminal offense at all. They were killed for economic competition, for social assertion, for nothing more than the perceived failure to demonstrate adequate deference to a white person's authority. Now, I told you at the beginning that there is a mystery at the center of this story, a thread that has never been fully pulled, that leads somewhere that the American historical consensus has never quite been willing to go.
The Book of Obadiah. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We've heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen, thou art greatly despised. The pride of thine heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, Who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. If thieves came to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee, and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of the mount of Esau? And thy mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captive his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates, and cast lots upon Jerusalem, even thou wast as one of them. But thou shouldst not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldst thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldst thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldst not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldst not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldst thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Neither shouldst thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. But the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. And the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. And they shall kindle in them, and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau. For the Lord hath spoken it. And they of the south shall possess the mount of Esau, and they of the plain the Philistines, and they shall possess the fields of Ephraim, and the fields of Samaria. And Benjamin shall possess Gilead. And the captivity of this host of the children of Israel shall possess that of the Canaanites, even unto Zarephath. And the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Sepharad, shall possess the cities of the south. And Saviors shall come up on Mount Zion to judge the mount of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. Revelation 20. And I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit, and a great chain in his hand. And he laid hold on the dragon, that old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal upon him, that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years should be fulfilled. And after that he must be loosed a little season. And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power, but they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years. And when the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison, and shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth, and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven, and devoured them. And the devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and shall be tormented day and night for ever and ever. And I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it, from whose face the earth and the heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. And the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it. And death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them. And they were judged every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Revelation 18. And after these things I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and is become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works, in the cup which she hath filled to her double. How much she hath glorified herself, and lived deliciously. So much torment and sorrow give her. For she saith in her heart, I sit a queen, and am no widow, and shall see no sorrow. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, and mourning, and famine. And she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise any more, the merchandise of gold and silver and precious stones, and of pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet, and all fine wood and all manner vessels of ivory,